Welcome to the Mental Health Bootcamp podcast. This is the podcast where three Canadians and one American, all of us psychotherapists, serve you cutting-edge mental health knowledge. I am Ryan Howes from California, USA.
And I'm Brooke Lewis from Vancouver, Canada.
And I'm Joanna Boyd, also from Vancouver, Canada.
And I'm Chris Boyd, also from Vancouver, Canada. And I'm also Joanna's brother.
Right on. Yes, that's true. I slipped there and said that I was from Canada. I don't know what that means. Maybe there was a Freudian slip. Maybe I'm gonna move there or something. I don't know.
We would love that, Ryan.
We would love
that. Unfortunately, your country won't let my country in right now because of COVID, right?
It's very true.
That's from, I think the border, like if you fly into Canada, that would work. And you would be right in our bubble, I'm sure, after maybe a 2-week quarantine. But then hugs.
Then hugs.
From some people.
Not from Brooke, but Chris and I will give you the hugs.
Lots and lots of hugs.
That is an interesting kind of side topic, right? The hugging, the physical touch thing. That's just never been your thing, huh, Brooke?
No, not my thing. Not a big hugger. Not from a huggy family, so that might be part of it. Yeah. I've gotten better over the years. Part of it was reframing to, you know what, other people enjoy these hugs. And if it's not painful, it's like just doesn't feel right always. Anyways. Yeah.
Okay. So you've kind of adapted a little bit for other people's sake.
In a safe way while still respecting my personal boundaries. So there might not be a linger hug. It might be like an A-frame tap hug.
Those are nice too.
Or a one arm.
Yeah, hug. Side-by-side buddy hug.
Yeah, that's good too.
At a girl, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, one silver lining of COVID is I don't have to shake clients' hands. Because I have a really bad handshake. I've been trying to work on it, like years and years of trying to work on it, but just kind of, you don't have to do it anymore. It's COVID.
Oh man, Chris, I didn't even think of that. You must have been so relieved.
I am like, hello, nice to meet you. There's a hand sanitizer and we're going to head into this office or virtually, of course you can't shake hands that way. So.
What's a bad handshake? How's your handshake bad?
It's so awkward.
It is kind of awkward. Yeah.
It's like I can't
even overthink it. You just overthink
it's like I'm overthinking it and squeezing and I don't know. Yeah.
And then your hand gets sweaty.
It does. Yeah.
Like immediately? You just start moisten up?
Clammy. Yeah. I shook one client's hand. He's like, oh man, that's not the best handshake. I'm like, no.
Oh no.
Good way to
Now I know people who are kind of like overly strong, muscle shakers, right?
I do that. I'm overly, people are like, oh, that's a handshake.
I have a pretty firm one as well.
Oh boy. And then there's kind of the dead fish thing of just kind of
it's like awkward, like, I don't know.
Like stiff, like his hand doesn't melt to someone else's.
Come in for it and I don't know.
If only the listeners could be seeing us right now. Try to find our YouTube video. It's we're trying to describe this.
Oh, that is funny. Okay, well, I'm sorry, Chris, that after years and years of practice, it still hasn't come together for you.
I'll get there, though. I have some time to practice, so.
It's true. Yes, that's true. And, of course, no one will be shaking hands anyway, probably, for a while, so, if ever.
Oh.
It's true.
Yes. I was just thinking about that, with the whole COVID thing. And remember many months ago, people were talking about washing hands and singing songs about washing hands and bumping elbows. And that just kind of went away, it seems like. I mean, of course, people are still advised to do it, but the talking about it has kind of ceased,
That's true. And we were also doing the bump and elbows thing. But I thought that was kind of weird because you were also told to cough in your elbow. Right? So then our friend group decided to start doing a hip check, like a disco 70s dance move. So we would bum bump everyone
Yeah.
for
Yeah, it was like a
hello
bum
and a
boop.
goodbye. A little bum boop. Yeah,
It's good.
it was great.
Do you
They
guys still do
realized-
that?
Well,
no,
no,
we
because you
realized
can't be 6
it's
feet.
yeah, that's it.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
But it was fun while it lasted, though. It was like boop.
And everyone made a boop sound every time. Beep, beep.
Jesus. You guys, you Canadians. I don't know what you're saying last week, Brooke, about you guys being polite but not friendly. I think bumping butts together is about as friendly as it can get. I don't know. So, okay, I guess we're going to dive into our topic here before too long.
Yes.
If we have a topic, did anyone remember our ambush topic today?
It's me.
It is.
Are you
Brooke.
ready? Do you want me to send it?
I am ready. Drum roll, Chris.
What is the ambush, Ryan? Can you describe it?
Oh, of
Oh.
course. I
Right,
forgot.
Joe.
I always get sidetracked and I get so eager I forget to describe. So the ambush is this interesting idea we had that one person will come up with a topic and not tell the other three. It will be an ambush for those three. Just like in a therapy session, we don't know what we're going to be talking about whenever someone walks through the door or we turn on our computer. So we're kind of unprepared, but that's intentional, and we're kind of thinking on our feet. So Brooke has sent me the ambush for this evening, and I am so eager to dive in. Let us begin. Oh, it's short and
So
sweet.
excited.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. You ready?
Oh no.
The topic is depression versus existential crisis.
Brooke.
That's all it. That's all the words. Depression versus existential crisis. Wow.
So good. Ah.
Okay, let's kick off this cheery topic. What were you thinking? Brooke, tell us a little more about this.
Joanna, the listeners are going to have to check out the YouTube. Like, I'm crying because to me, your reactions are funny. So yeah, a little surprise. It's an ambush. So the reason that I bring this up is because I think in the population that I see, I'm seeing more existential crisis than I am depression.
So it's not a confusion of am I depressed or is this a crisis, or are you just seeing?
They're coming in describing their symptoms, and for me, I view it more as existential crisis versus a depressive episode or depression. But maybe that's because for my mind it's easier to work with that way. So I think it's worth talking about what is depression, what is a depressed episode, and what is it not, versus existentialism, and what happens when we get into an existential crisis, or and how those might differ or what they might present as in the counseling room, right? And if we have time, I know that that's a big topic, but if we have time to, it can easily venture off as well into when depression, a client comes in and they're presenting as depressed, but it's actually something deeper. There's something else going on.
Something else going on.
Right?
Like an existential crisis or something else.
Or something else.
Oh man.
Okay.
Any thoughts?
Nope. Time to wrap up, everybody.
I gotta go somewhere. I have to be.
You know, I was watching a YouTube video today, and Stephen Colbert. It was an old video from a couple of years ago. He was doing a workout session with the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it's funny because he was like, "What constitutes a sandwich?" And her first answer was, "What is your definition of a sandwich?" And got right into the details because his question was like, is a hot dog considered a sandwich? So she right away, she tried to break it down into definitions, right? So for our listeners and for probably us too, we should probably define what existential crisis or existentialism is, as well as we should probably have a working definition of depression too, right?
Certainly. That's absolutely the case. So, existential crisis. I'll begin, but I'll tag team someone else here. So, if we just take the term existential, starts off with existence, right? It's about It's about the idea of our existence. It's someone coming to grips with the fact that we are mortal, that our lives have a beginning and a middle and an end, and that, and oftentimes the crisis part comes when we are very much aware of the finite nature of life, that life does not extend, or at least life on earth, depending on your belief systems, but that this one life we have will draw to a close. And for a lot of people, that's where the crisis comes in. Oh my gosh, I've only got so many years on the planet, or so many years left, or I don't know how many years I have left. It could be ending anytime. And when people come to that kind of stark realization that this gig doesn't last forever, that can cause a bit of a crisis. And not just, again, it's not just about the focus of the dying. It's oftentimes a focus on, well, what is my existence all about? What does my life really mean?
Yeah.
What kind of mark am I leaving on the world, and what purpose and meaning do I have in my life that's here on earth, right?
And once that begins, it can lead to lack of motivation, feeling stuck, and a loss of joy and pleasure.
Well, why would, I mean, just the pure contemplation of that doesn't necessarily mean all of those things, right?
Not necessarily, but it sometimes can get to a place of that.
Where people can start to feel like, oh, maybe my life does not have meaning, or maybe there's not enough time left, or maybe I'm not going to leave the mark that I wish I would have left. Is that what you're saying?
Or I may not ever find a meaning or purpose.
Okay.
Yeah. I also find that the existential crisis or angst shows up a lot for kind of late teens, early to mid 20s. So multiple clients, it comes up for them, and you get bombarded by these thoughts. And I think there's a reason why that is, like developmentally speaking, increasing neurons, lack of pathways, and maybe the part of the brain that's supposed to help you out with logic, rationality, and maybe coming to some kind of certainty is still going through some changes. So for the most part, up to that time, you're kind of in the moment, you're living life kind of carefree, and then boom, you get hit with these really intensive thoughts about your future, about who I am, how I fit in this world, what I should be doing in terms of education or career, or it's very prevalent.
Oftentimes people will experience, yes, I agree with that, just in a phase of life, but also people experience this during times of great transition. They'll talk about an existential, oh, I lost my job and now I'm having an existential crisis, or my relationship has ended, so now I'm having an existential crisis. And it's usually, as they're considering kind of the big questions, the big topics, what am I doing? What am I known for? Who am I spending life with? Then people start to ask these questions, and yes, sometimes it does become a crisis because they're not coming up with answers that are satisfying for them, right?
Sure. So then my question into that on a bigger scale is, do you think that some of what we're seeing, if clients are presenting with existential crisis, and I'm noticing it often or a decent amount, is that, or do you think that might be reflected in the global climate of things? So we say that it's more likely to happen during a time of transition, such as job loss, or it could be getting into university or finishing university, or loss of a relationship. But what about the fact that the world is in transition? The fact that there's climate change, and that there's police brutality issues popping up, and racism, and COVID, and all these other large global topics that are creating a global transition. And I'm wondering, maybe that's trickling down. Maybe there's a zeitgeist.
Sure. I had a client a couple of days ago. He was saying how, he was having some of his existential thoughts, just even about our housing crisis up here in Vancouver, and how expensive it is. And, if I don't get certain grades in grade 12, can I get into that school? And can I actually move out and have a job and find me? He was spiraling, right? So on a greater scale, we're a lot of access to information right now, and there's a lot of challenges happening in the world as we speak, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So do you think sometimes existential crisis is being mislabeled as depression? Or is it one of the same, or do they complement each other?
I just wonder how long someone would be in it. That's all. Like if they have this and they kind of go down a spiral for like a day or a few hours, but then they're kind of out of it. And then, like it wouldn't be, wow, I feel like I'm depressed or anything like that. There'd probably be a few factors to consider.
I think we've got to define the hot dog here though, and talk about what is depression, right? Before we get into the comparison piece.
Mm-hmm. Joanna, did you want to, I'm throwing you under the bus there, but
I can take a swing at it. Like when I think of depression, it's like more prolonged, isn't it? Like it's well, consider it a mood disorder, but it's feelings of persistent sadness that can impact the key aspects of your life, right?
Mm-hmm. So impairing functioning in one or more domains of life, so work, personal life, school, those sorts of things. Prolonged sadness, but it's also lack of motivation and energy, loss of joy or interest in things that you would usually find pleasurable, changes in appetite, changes in sleep. Potential changes like a loss of sex drive. So all of that gets affected. And then typically for a depressed episode, it's got to be for 2 weeks, is kind of 2 weeks or longer for a period, right? Where it's, and that's like a traditional depressed episode. And then there's other forms of depression as well.
I also want to throw in there that as far as like the cause or the source of depression, for some folks, it comes out of the blue. It's a purely like a chemical mental process it's not really kicked off by anything. It's just all of a sudden they find themselves slipping into a depression. Other folks, it may be more of a reactive depression, is kind of the term that we use there. Situational. Or situational, episodic. It's something where, something happens and then as a result, I become more depressed.
It's a good point though, there's a biological factor, right? There's a genetic factor, experiential, right?
Yeah.
So temperament, like there's a lot that plays into it. So that's a really good point, because sometimes people think, it's just sadness, right? You just feel sad and something happening experiential, but sometimes it can hit you drastically, right? They say 30 to 40% of the way that we feel is influenced by genetics.
Mm-hmm. And it's so much more than sadness, as noted, right? I think that's a stereotypical. Well, you don't seem sad, but it's not. It could just be. There's so much more, as we noted before.
Absolutely. I find that the most common symptom of depression that I see in clients is lack of energy. They're devitalized. They have a hard time focusing and doing things and activating themselves and getting out of bed and all of that. And then, of course, one of my favorite words, it's not a great symptom, is anhedonia, which is when you lose interest in things that you once found pleasurable. Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of depression as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we have these two sort of defined, existential crisis and the depression, how do they measure up? I'm sure there's overlap here, but how can we distinguish between the two? I guess that's kind of your question, right, Brooke?
Yeah, or what you guys kind of think about. So if a client comes in, I find that a client comes in and they're like, oh, I'm kind of feeling depressed. But the more we flesh that out, it's actually more of an existential situation than it is a traditional depressed episode. And so part of my decision on this topic was trying to provide a little bit of awareness or education or background that they can look similar, but sometimes they're different.
Okay, let me pause and ask a kind of a side question here real quick, Brooke, which is, a lot of people get really interested in diagnosis, differential diagnosis. What's the difference between this diagnosis and that one? Or is it this thing or is it that thing? And people, I especially knew this when I was teaching graduate students, especially in the first couple of years. They get really excited about, I can do this diagnosis thing now. I can, hit the criteria and all of that. But the function of diagnosis is kind of limited. I mean, in terms of, okay, let's say that we know it's this and not that. Well, how does that really inform the treatment? Does it really change much? If someone is dealing with dysthymia, which is a milder long-term depression, or major depression, are we really is that going to affect how we're treating this, how we're going to talk to the person? What is that really going to mean in the long run? So I guess that's kind of a question I have here when you're talking about people who are showing up saying, I think I'm really depressed and I need some help with that. And then you figure out, oh, actually it's probably more of an existential crisis that they're experiencing. Is that really going to change much of what you do in the room, do you think?
I think it's going to influence what you're doing.
Okay.
Or for me personally, it would influence what I'm doing, because those are bigger, deeper questions that are going to be definitely insight-based, but kind of more positive psychology stuff, or
you mean when you're
existentialism itself. Like, so in the room, what you're doing with the client, those strategies or questions may look different from what you are going to do, the questions or strategies that you might use if somebody's in a depressed episode. So chances are, depressed episode client, I'm going to go over making sure you're getting out of bed, having a shower, opening the blinds, basic, like let's get, the train has stopped and we have to get the train moving kind of situation. And then for existentialists, like that's going to be a different conversation of how can we provide you or help you through this process of trying to find meaning and fulfillment in your life, and what is that going to look like? So is that fostering curiosity? Is that trying to encourage them to engage in different activities, engaging more in social connection? I think those strategies might help persons in major depression, but they're not going to help them right away, right? Like it's further on.
And I think, Brooke, even naming, if someone comes in worried about depression or everything they might have heard about depression, and then you're actually naming it as something, or saying this could be an existential crisis, or, you know, that could provide some, I don't know, a different thing in their heads. It could be less overwhelming, or it could be, wow, okay, this is not what I thought it was, and let's learn more about what this crisis is. And
sure. Yeah. Often I personally don't try to provide diagnoses or words of diagnosis in treatment, in my own treatment. But I might suggest, like, oh, maybe you want to look into this resource and see if it resonates with you. And then maybe giving an article or some education, like, I'm wondering, do you take anything away from this? Or maybe this doesn't fit with you and that's cool. But it's, for me, trying to understand, if I were to jump in their mind, how can I view their perspective the best, right?
Yeah. Well, sometimes the way I approach it is, the client presents this as I'm feeling depressed, is always a natural, like in a process where we try to discover what some of the causes might be. As we talked about before, it could be so many different causes, and sometimes we won't actually be able to grasp the depth of it, right? So I actually had a client who came to see me last week, and he said he presented with depression, and I think existential angst or existential crisis is an aspect of that, right? There's also other elements that I think is kind of manifesting itself, and it's leading to feelings of depression. So I see it as existential angst could be a bit of a cause of depression.
Okay, well, I mean, I think, like I said, that there's probably some overlap, or cases where there's some overlap, right? If you were someone who were already prone to depression, for the last 20 years, and then 2020 hit, oh yeah, I think it's quite possible that all of the kind of bleakness and scary components of this year could kick off another depressive episode, or start you down the road of an existential crisis. What is life all about, and what is this world all about? What's my place in it? So I think both are possible.
Do you ever find this? I don't want to go too much down this road, but I find when I've worked with some young adults and even some teens who might have a bit more of the what's the purpose of life, or it leads them down the why even bother, but almost a depersonalization from, like, it's almost like they are outside their bodies, or like, is this a simulation or like, what is even real? Like, I find that's come up a few times, and I think, I don't know if you've experienced that with your clients, but I'm like, whoa,
Definitely more in the past maybe 2 years or so. Clients themselves coming in and using that word. So they'll be like 15 or 16 years old and coming in and using depersonalization before I say it, or even before they describe it. They're like, oh, I'm experiencing depersonalization.
A little web MD searching. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I often see that as like an extreme manifestation of stress as well, right?
Yeah, of course.
The depersonalization side of
And
things. But
sometimes from residual drug use.
and drug use, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
So like if there's been recreational drug use and then now depersonalization hits afterwards, they're like something could, anyway.
Yeah, I think a whole other topic, but I think I've noticed that along with those questions but I know it also relates to so many other things as well.
Yeah.
Existential, even in the term existential crisis, we have crisis, right? It's not just, there's something that's traumatic or panicky or stressful that's going on in that moment that a person's experiencing, right? It's a crisis of existence. And when you look at that and you look at depression, which is kind of it's a crisis of mood, I guess, a crisis of energy, a crisis of functioning in a lot of ways. I mean, they're both problematic. I guess I just want to make sure that listeners know that we're not saying that one's fine and the other one's not.
Mm-mm.
You know, they're both very distressing for whoever's experiencing it. And I guess the purpose of this discussion is to just point out that, you know, you may be mistaking one for the other, or there may be components of one in the other, and they're both worth addressing and maybe teasing out, trying to see, okay, how much of this is about kind of just the zaniness of 2020 right now that a lot of people are sharing and feeling right now. Like, yeah, this is we're 200,000 dead in the United States. Just that on a headline alone can cause people to have a bit of an existential crisis. Like, oh my gosh, that is a heck of a lot of people. And what if it's someone I love, or what if it's me? And what these are people who didn't expect to die 6 months ago, and now they're gone. You know, that could be me. So that's an existential crisis.
Yes, I agree. I'm glad that you just pointed that out. I agree that we do need to really emphasize that both are extremely distressing and impair functioning in multiple areas of life. And it's, yeah.
So Brooke, tell me, how did you go about kind of teasing that out? How did you talk with your clients who come in and say, I think I'm depressed, and actually figure out, no, it sounds like it's more of an existential crisis? What would you ask them?
Or more on that realm, perhaps, right? As you mentioned, they can overlap, I think. And to what Chris alluded to too, there could be, and you, Ryan, could be something else in there that's prompted it, right? Like a trauma or a loss or a grief or something else going on there. But I typically ask, what are you noticing? Like, tell me what that's like for you. Can you tell me what you're experiencing when that happens, or what do you notice when you're in that state? So, and I try and flesh out, and they say whatever they need to, and then I'll guide or ask more questions, like physiologically, what are you noticing, or what are your thought patterns like, or what are your emotions like, and try and tease that out. And then I'll check in on the major things. How is your sleeping and your eating and connecting socially? Are you going to work? Are you getting out of bed? Where is this hiccuping? To try and then help me kind of come up with a plan. So in working with me, I use the metaphor of traveling together. I say they get to pick where we're going. That's our goal. But I'm going to pick how we're going to get there. So are we going to take a boat? Are we going for a walk? Or like, let's go together. You get to pick where, and I'm going to try and get us there. So I need to know where I'm going, I guess. And that's going to be, so I try and explore that with the client of what are they experiencing and where do they want to be, and let's see if we can get there.
Yeah.
I like that.
In regard to the existential angst, based on my research on the topic, I find that there's like 4 areas that tend to give people meaning and purpose. So like a passion, a cause, connection, and or spirituality or nature. So there's a lot of overlap in those areas, of course. But when a client says, I don't know, what my purpose is or what I should be focusing on, often I say, you know what, we got to go off of the information we have right now and pick a path. It doesn't have to be the path. It doesn't have to be a home run here. We just have to make a decision. And then I bet you anything, once you commit to that, you'll learn whether that's the right decision or not for you, right? And then try to reassess a bit. So I think often there's this social expectation that we have to have it all figured out and know exactly what we need to be doing. And if a curveball is thrown our way, then we should know exactly how we should pivot. But that's unrealistic. That's not life, right?
I like the trial and error approach, right? It's kind of if you don't know what to do, do something. And then you can always kind of course correct if you need to, right?
Absolutely, right? There's a lot of people that sit back and they're waiting for the perfect idea, the perfect plan. But again, it's unrealistic. I remember this professor that I think the 3 of us had back in college. He had the best name, Cornelius Ray, Conray. And he said he got his master's degree at 47, doctorate at 50 something. And everyone gasped, like, as if like something awful went wrong in his life, right? So he's like, he sensed that and said, no, like, yeah, I didn't know what I wanted to do at first, but I traveled extensively. I worked a few different jobs. I learned a lot about myself and the world. I would not change a thing, right? So it's
great.
Subjective, right?
Yes. Speaking of anecdotes, I've got an anecdote from a former supervisor of mine many moons ago. He was talking about distinguishing grief from depression. So he wasn't talking about existential crisis, but I wonder if there might be some overlap. This is a guy who had worked in the county hospital system for many, many, many years. He was a great wealth of knowledge. And he said, here's the way that he distinguishes between depression and grief. He said he would ask the client if they can remember any sort of funny stories or any joyful times in their life, right? And if they could come up and maybe tell it to him, and if they could come up with something that was kind of humorous in their life and kind of, and they could actually feel happiness for a minute, he was like, they're not depressed, because depression is this blanket that kind of covers it makes it difficult for you to feel joy or happiness really in hardly any area of your life. And there are, of course, degrees of depression, right? So, but if someone was kind of profoundly affected, but they could still, share a funny story or laugh at a joke or something like that, temporarily step out of that so that they could actually feel something else, he was like, that's probably grief and probably not depression. So I thought that was an interesting way to look at it,
Very interesting. Yeah.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if that fits with existential crisis, but I think if you're exploring with people kind of what it is that's on their mind, what have they been thinking about, what are they, when they're falling asleep at night, what's kind of running through their minds, you might get a sense of what their anxieties, what their worries are, and what might be spinning around in their heads. And if it's all on a nature of I'm afraid for my life, or I'm afraid of what I'm doing with my life, what's my purpose and meaning, then it might be headed down that path. And if it's, like you say, Brooke, if you've already checked with all the kind of self-care things, are they sleeping? Are they eating? Are they exercising? Are they withdrawing from relationships? You might be looking into their kind of depressive symptoms, right?
Or family history as well, right?
And family history is a big one, sure.
Previous episodes, that kind of stuff, Yeah, it's not I guess part of this too is just to highlight it's not always clear cut. There's going to be a lot of overlap, and it's in the process of therapy, you want to stay open-minded and curious to lean into different areas and try and be as honest and transparent as possible so that you can get the best treatment that you can, right? Because all of that information is going to guide how to move forward.
Exactly.
For sure.
Any thoughts there, Joanna? You're making
Yeah, no,
a
I think
face.
I was
contemplating
pondering
something.
Yeah, I was pondering the antidote or whatever Brian gave or heard. Who'd you hear that from? Was it a
It was supervisor at the LA County Hospital.
Yeah, I think, but I know it's kind of not the topic we're on, but yeah, I just don't know. I wonder about that, or I question that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I feel that a lot of people who you find out have struggle with great depression are ones you sometimes least expect, because they might be ones who are able to, whether there's the comedians in the world or people who are able to have some moments or of reprieve, but they're very short-lived and not very, even if you talk to them, like you can see them smile or laugh at something, but then once you talk to them about that moment, they're like, it was fleeting, it was so short. Right. So yeah, I think I just wonder about that. I wouldn't probably say if you're able to tell a funny story, it's not in that moment. Yeah, so that's all. I think that caught me. I think I was zoned out thinking about that stuff. But
analyzing it. Yeah, no, it's a good point though.
It is a good point because there is high functioning people, like people who are high functioning depressed people, right? They have depression, but they're still out in the world, but there's still a deep hurt or pain underneath that. So
and I think there's such a variety, right? Such a and I think
spectrum,
such a spectrum. So I think that's important as well. But
or coming out of the depression too, yeah.
Sure, and yes, and keep in mind that this guy is working at the county hospital where he's seeing a pretty extreme population. Not the worried well. These are folks who are pretty experiencing kind of the depths of the symptoms. So yeah, just an interesting thought though, as far as trying to consider, is it
other possibilities?
Yeah, is it something that someone is kind of just ruminating about, kind of worrying about, feeling bad about, or is it a mood? Is it like covering everything, right? That's an interesting way to look at it, at least.
Oh, interesting. Well, it generated some great conversation, and I hopefully at a future boot camp or bootcast we can talk a bit more about depression and maybe some techniques to help get out of that darkness, right?
Oh yes,
that's a big topic, right?
Yes. If anyone's interested more in talking about grief, then flip on back to episode 4, which was all about grief. And can you believe it, guys? This is our 10th episode.
What?
10
That's
episodes.
Like 2 high fives.
Big high fives all around for everyone. Yes, I've got to say,
some bum boops.
Yeah, bump your buns together if you approve of that.
Those hips.
Those hips. It's like a hip check.
It's a hip check. Yeah.
Yes. Friendly,
to clarify that.
And polite, of course. Hey, you know what I think I'm going to do this week? I think I'm going to tell 2 people about the Mental Health Bootcamp podcast. I think I'm going to share that.
You know what, Ryan? I'll do the same.
You too?
That's a great idea.
You're going to tell 2 people about it?
I am.
Wow. Chris, will you join us?
So not just like a post here. This has got to be like a conversation or letting someone know.
Yeah, I'm going to tell 2 people that there's a podcast that we do, that we're trying to share some knowledge with people. Have a good time.
Sure.
Brooke, can you join us in that?
Yep, I can do that.
Okay, well, and maybe the listeners can join us in that too, and tell 2 people about the podcast. We'll get this thing going around the world. We're dying to get to Australia. We're spreading across, and Nunavut. We still haven't gotten to Nunavut, but we're spreading across the rest of Canada by like wildfire. If you do enjoy what you're hearing here today, please like and subscribe on Apple, Google, or Podbean, or anywhere really that you find podcasts. Send us your questions to info@mentalhealthbootcamp.com. Visit us on Facebook or Instagram. And like we said, tell 2 friends. And that's all we got for you tonight, everybody. Have a good night,
topic,
everybody.
Brooke.
Great topic. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Was that the timer sound?
Yes.
Or they're like
Oh.
aliens coming. Is that an alien
And
invention?
aliens.
That was a good topic. I like I always like the existential stuff, right?